Mold can absolutely destroy our bodies. Okay, it can fly subclinical. I call it the number one home wrecker for a reason. Your child's going to have a higher risk for congenital malformations or birth defects. So we need to take this seriously. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Jacque Show. Today, we're going to start a little mini series here talking about one of my least favorite topics, but we're going to be talking about mold and mold toxicity. This has been something that, I've become a specialist in, not by choice per se, but by experience. My experience allows me to help make huge, profound impact in other people's lives and other patients' lives, especially when it's coming to mold toxicity. So we have a couple of episodes here. We're going to string them together, and I'm going to make them short and sweet so that they're a little bit more easy to digest. So parents, if you're taking your kids off to school, I'm going to lay off the profanity here as I go through this. I'm going to try my best, and I will apologize ahead of time if something leaks out. But that way, typical drive time, if you're dropping your kids off, maybe 15, 20 minutes or so. So with that being said, let's start with the very basics here, okay? What is mold? What is it? We have this differentiation where, when we're growing up, and I don't know if you grew up like I did, but every Saturday was a cleaning day for us. And so we'd be cleaning the bathtubs, we'd be cleaning the sinks, we'd clean everything top to bottom, make it shine more than it shined the entire week, right? And we would do that every single week. And the goal in that was to basically reduce any contaminants. If there was any mildew or mold growth, we would be wiping it off. But basically making sure there's no calcium deposits, soap scum, whatever in the house, right? So growing up when I was a kid, I never really heard of mold. It was only about this mildew. And a lot of cleaners out there said mold and mildew. And it's like, what the heck is the difference between mold and mildew, right? So let's just start with that. So if we're talking about mildew is something that you can absolutely have a buildup on the showers, on the bathtubs, in the sinks. That can be mildew, but mildew is going to be separate and it's going to be different compared to mold. Mold is going to be more life-threatening. Mildew can create an environment in which further more toxic and more dangerous molds can also grow, right? They're both fungal bodies. Mildew is fungus, mold is fungus. So they both require the same types of environments to be able to overgrow. Okay, like crabgrass versus dandelions, right? They're both considered weeds. They need different kind of environments to be able to grow. They don't grow in the same spots. That's kind of like mold and mildew, okay? So I think that was a bad analogy, but either way, pressing on from that. So we had mildew and we had mold, and I feel like as we were growing up, there was a lot of confusion between what we were told or what we assumed was mildew when in reality it was mold. Okay, nobody really wanted to admit, hey, my house is moldy. But I can remember going to friends' houses, like down the streets or wherever it was, and I would go into these homes and I'm like, something smells off in this. It smells musty. I didn't know what mold smelled like at the time, so I didn't have a basis of, if I go into a house, is it mold or is it not? And as I grew up and as I matured and I got older and I got into this field of work, I started to be able to notice signs and symptoms of mold toxicity, which is going to be something that we'll save for another podcast. Again, I'm going to try to keep this a little bit more fine-tuned so it's not talking your ear off. But what is mold? Mold is a fungus that grows in the house and it requires certain nutrients to be able to overgrow. So mold in its cleanest, not even cleanest, in the most specific sense, mold requires water, so moisture. It requires wood. It requires some oxygen. And then you'll throw in humidity, but humidity is just moisture within the air. Okay? If you have those ingredients, mold will grow. Okay? And if you're like, well, wait a second. I see mold on drywall. Right? I see it on the ceiling. I see it in my bathtub. Right? You don't necessarily need wood for it to grow. If there's moisture in some form of food source for it, it will grow. Okay, and the other thing that people don't realize is if there is mold in the ceiling, which more often than not there is, because the condensation from showers, if you don't have an exhaust fan or if you never put it on, the condensation, that moisture goes up and it sticks to the drywall. Okay, there's times where you could take showers. I remember being in college, we would take showers and the top of the shower, right? It wasn't porcelain, it wasn't tiled, it wasn't anything fancy, it was just a drywall top. And you'd have beads of water on that would drop down. Okay, what was that doing? It was attracting moisture into the drywall. The drywall is going to allow for mold growth to occur, and then mold spores are going to rain down into the shower stalls, and then that's when they would come in once a week and basically bleach out the entire shower. You didn't want to go in there because it smelled horrific. You'd like die if you breathe that chlorine in. Okay, so what is mold? Mold is a fungus. Mold requires a food source, water, right, some moisture, and some oxygen. Okay. Where does it come from? Great question, right? Great question I posed myself. Where does it come from? Right? You don't just wake up one day and mold travels into the home like, hey, I got mold, right? Mold comes from a weakness in the home, an excess accumulation of moisture. So it can come from the roof. It can come from piping leading out of the roof. It could be coming out of the siding. You can have a tree that casts shade, constantly keeps moisture, and the sun never dries out that portion of the home, and you can have mold accumulation on the siding. Siding is eventually going to weaken. The mold's going to grow in because mold doesn't just stay stationary. Mold can crawl. It can creep. So it will go underneath and will try to push through the board, the siding, the vapor barrier, and everything to push into the actual home. Okay, mold can come from anywhere. It can come from basement. It can come from one bad flood that you had 10 years ago that you thought was remedied by a French drain, but you never got rid of the moisture that was in the cinder block. Okay, and if you're in Arizona like me, and you're like, well, we don't have basements. Well, I miss basements to start off with. I love basements growing up as a kid, but same thing can happen for you, right? We have kind of the stucco siding, right? If you get a chip in that, you can have moisture that starts to creep in. If moisture creeps in, we can have more moisture accumulation, more oxygen, more wood, more mold growth. Okay, or it could be a pipe. We all have pipes in our home. A pipe could have burst, or there could be a slow leak coming from something that either you repaired yourself or these lazy builders did. And you don't see it because it's behind the walls. Moisture, water, okay, wood, oxygen, some condensation, kind of a perfect storm in there, and mold will grow. Okay, you can even do an experiment with yourself. Put a piece of wood, okay, just a nice, not weather treated, but just a piece of wood, bare bone, raw piece of wood. Put water on it. So get a water dropper, drop some beads of water, and put a glass lid over top of it and put it on a plate. See what happens. See how fast it happens as well. You'll see the wood actually decompose and rot. The mold will cause more growth, more mold, more decomposition of the wood. Okay. We have natural decomposition that takes place in the woods and the forest, and it helps with kind of reforestation, if you will, where a tree will fall, it'll get wet, damp. Mold will grow, it will decompose, mushrooms will grow on top of it as well, and we can actually have food source from the mushroom too. Mushrooms are kind of considered a mold. It's a myco family, so mold. But what is mold? Talked about it. Where does it come from? Pretty much everywhere. What does it need to grow? And then ultimately, how can we control that? Okay, so say you don't have any leakage in the home at all. You have no reason to think that you currently have mold. What can you do anyways to just make sure that you don't grow it? Okay, so make sure your home is at a certain set point humidity. Anywhere between 40 to 50% humidity is usually a safe spot for you to be. Our home, just because it's Arizona, it's at around like 30 or so there's not really much humidity inside the home, but there's also really no humidity outside as well, okay, unless it rains, and then obviously humidity is going to pick up. So trying to keep the home within a certain level of humidity. So if you have a dehumidifier that you're running in the basement, or you have one in the garage or the house or whatever it is, a dehumidifier can help to prevent any growth of mold or prevent any further growth. Now, a segue on that, and we'll do it in a separate episode, but a segue on that is a dehumidifier is not going to treat mold. Okay, it's going to try to stop the progress or stop the progression of mold growth within the home. It's really important to know. Right? So mold specialists say all you need is an air purifier and a dehumidifier. No, it's not true. Okay, and we'll talk about that, but don't get stuck in that. Use it as like a maintenance thing where you don't want your house to get too wet or too damp. Okay. The other thing is control the water. If you've got kids, it's really difficult to do. Most homes have like this, I think it's called MDF board, the side molding on the floors. I can't think of the word. I think it's just called molding, right? So the molding right there, it being MDF, it's very porous. It's very absorbent. So if you have kids in the bathtub, they're splashing water out of the bathtub, make sure that you have them wipe up after themselves when they come out of the bathtub. And when you do your weekly maintenance clean, make sure you just clean the areas, the seals and all that stuff. Make sure everything is nice and tight so there's no place for the water and moisture to kind of sip or slip through and go to, okay? So that's one thing you could do. The dehumidifier is another thing. You can have like an air doctor. We have them all around the house, not for the mold per se, but just for air quality control. Just like to breathe pure air. So I have them everywhere. Okay. Other things you can do is if you have any type of plumbing issues, if you have a drain that's not draining properly or appropriately, get a plumber in there to check your pipes and make sure everything is good so you're not spilling over or having any type of problems. Okay. How can we find the mold? Well, visual inspection is going to be what typical mold inspectors will do. They'll come and look and see if there's any areas where there's actual mold growth pushing out from the wall, the bathrooms, etc. There's no visual confirmation. Typically, they'll write you off and say, hey, you're good. There's no mold in the home. That's not necessarily true, but there's no visible mold in the home. Okay. Other things you can do too, and we'll talk about it on how to test, but you can get these fun little moisture readers from Home Depot or Lowe's, and you can just go around the home and just poke certain areas of the house where you think there might be moisture. And if there is any moisture behind the wall, the reader will go ballistic on you. It's a really simple way to see if you have any mold. Okay. Other things you can do too is make sure you have the filters, the dehumidifiers, moisture readers, and then every once in a while open up the windows, let cross breezes blow through. You don't really want to have stagnant air in your home for a very long period of time. Another thing too is assess your plant life. Okay, I have over there, I've got a pothos plant and I've got a money tree over there. You want to make sure that the soil stays like perfect consistency. Otherwise, the soil can actually cause mold spores, mold growth, and you can have mold that's flowing out into the home. People with mold or multiple chemical sensitivities can be sensitive to plants being in the home. Even though we think plants are good for us, if the soil is toxic or we have these mycospores or these mold spores in it, it's going to leach out and go into the environment, and then we're going to have our own little issue there. Now, the other thing that I want you to know too, I don't care. And I'll repeat 100 times. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. And one more time, I don't care what year your house was built. I don't. The year your house was built and the amount of mold you have has no bearing on mold. Okay? Now, if you've had a house that was built in the 1900s, right? You have 123 years or 100 plus years of potential damage that could have happened. But realistically, those homes built back then were built so much more sound than these homes today. Okay, because what happens is we have these homes that are being built. There's homes being built in my backyard right now. Okay, and what happens? We get rain, then they seal them up so tightly. And you think, well, that'll help to trap the oxygen. Wrong. If there's any moisture, okay, and with the heat that you have, heat's going to pull moisture out of the wood or out of the vapor barrier, wherever it may have been absorbed into. And if it can't escape because it's too tight, creates more condensation, more humidity, more moisture, and it eats through the walls. I'm seeing a record number, in my professional opinion, a record number of new built homes that have worse mold issues than old homes. Okay? So that's something to definitely understand, is that if you're sitting here and you're like, there's no way I have mold in my home. I just bought my home. My home is brand new. I don't care. Did you watch them step by step build your home? Right? And you get a mold inspection upon purchasing homes. In certain states, they kind of require that. Mold inspectors, they're terrible. They're actually horrible. Okay, they don't know what they're looking for. They're going to visual inspection. They poke around with the moisture reader. Sometimes we made ours do that. And they're like, okay, you're good. and then you move on with it, right? Because mold is one of those slow creeping things. You don't just get a massive infestation of mold overnight unless you have a wicked leak that's going on. But it takes months, weeks, months, years to develop. So you move into your new built home and you're like, ever since I moved in here, I haven't really felt right. Right. And then a year goes later, it's like, we bought a brand new house together, right? And we've been trying to conceive and we can't conceive. Her hormones are off. My gut is off. I have no sex drive. I have no libido. My energy's down. I'm like, check your house. And like, no, there's no way. No way. It's my house. It's brand new. It's brand new. Wrong. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I'm not trying to be insensitive. I have to let you know this because it's becoming more and more and more of an epidemic, pandemic, whatever word you want to use. It's spreading like wildfire. I think the statistics right now is over 50% of homes have water or are water damaged buildings. Okay, so like at least over 50%. And those are the ones that are being reported. Okay, so there's much more than that. I promise you it is. So the year in which your home was built does not matter. In fact, the newer homes are built tighter and have a higher risk and higher probability of you trapping mold and moisture in there, more mold growth. We're going to kind of wrap it up for this week's episode here. And we're again trying to condense this down nice and short and sweet. But what do we need to know about mold? Mold can absolutely destroy our bodies. Okay, it can fly subclinical. I call it the number one home wrecker for a reason. Usually one spouse gets hit really hard with mold symptoms and usually the other one is completely fine. Then that one will go to the traditional medical doctors. Medical doctors will have no idea what's going on. He'll go and drop $100,000 on IVF treatment thinking that's going to work, when in reality you've got mold toxicity that's stopping you from being pregnant. And even if you do conceive in a home with mold, your child's going to have a higher risk for congenital malformations or birth defects. So there's a lot that goes into this. So we need to take this seriously, and we'll go through like the signs and symptoms here as we move along. But as we flow, the way I have it right now is, so this week's episode was, what is mold? So basically give you some more insight. What is mold? What causes it to grow? What can you do to try to analyze it and isolate, right? How can you starve it out? Next week is symptoms that your house might have mold. Following week, symptoms that you may have mold in the body, okay? Next one is, how do we test it, right? What test should we use? And then the last one I have right now, may do more, is you find out that you have mold in your home. What do you do? And the following one would be mold in your body. What do you do? So I'm going to give you a play-by-play on what is mold, what are symptoms of mold in the home, in you, how do you test it, how do you treat the home, how do you treat you? So at the end of this series, you're going to be smarter than any mold remediation specialist that's out there. And it's really unfortunate to say, but it was actually funny. A chiropractor I do a lot of work with here in town, he found mold in his home. And the one guy that he was working with too and helped him test the home was like, mold people they're terrible because they're going in moldy environments every single day and assessing the level of toxicity. When it comes to mold, I never understood this because I know the severity of mold. People will come in without masks on. And I'm not talking about the stupid COVID masks. I'm talking about like actual masks, like breathing masks, respirator masks, to make sure that you're not breathing in any type of mold toxicity at all. If I were in that industry, I would not go into any home without a respirator on until I test it and see that it's clean. That's the bottom line. But if these people are going in home to home to home, they're just breathing more. Clinically, I see health rapidly decline. And one of the most common places it goes is the brain. Like that was what happened to me. I used to tell my wife, Megan, I was like, my brain's not functioning at 100%. And I know the power of words, and she did too. And she would yell at me for it. She's like, stop saying that. I'm like, I need to be honest with you. My brain is not functioning. I have no idea what was going on at the time. It's like, this thing won't work. Mold loves to hide in fat. Right? So whether it's actual fat, which I don't have much of, or fat can store in gallbladder. So mold can store in the gallbladder. And it's also going to get stored up in the brain because the brain is fat. Right? So we need to take these things seriously. And so this is why I'm pushing this series out here, is because I haven't talked about mold in a while and it needs to be talked about again. Okay? So next week, we're going to be talking again, symptoms that your house may have mold. So Thank you for tuning in today. Hopefully this short and sweet is good enough for you. It's awkward to me because I love talking my face off here, but we'll get to all of this stuff. And if you have a series that you want me to talk about, we're doing this. We're going to do some back to school stuff here as well to try to help parents. But this is something, again, that I really want to be able to get out there for you guys so that way you know it and you can start taking charge of your health yet again. Okay? Never settle for anything less than perfection when it comes to your health.